9.3, a little bit of review from the very end of the last unit. We've got the two Allied nations in World War II that produced the most, that made it possible for Allied victory. That would be the United States and the Soviet Union. And then the three nations at the Yalta and Potsdam conferences. Again, the US, Soviet Union, and Great Britain. But remember, at the end of World War II, Great Britain is so exhausted that they just sort of bow out of everything. We saw it with the creation of Israel, and really this leaves us with the Soviet Union and United States. So some of these tensions that lead to the Cold War hopefully are familiar. We have talked about communism. The Communist Manifesto, it says, "Working men of the world, unite." It has been very clear that it wants communism to be a worldwide phenomenon. It wants it to spread. This could be a little threatening if you like democracy. Then during World War II, the Soviet Union and Britain and America are friends purely out of necessity. They have a common enemy. They're frenemies. They don't like each other other than that, or at least Britain and America don't like the Soviet Union. So once the war is over, sort of understandable why Stalin wants that buffer zone, why he wants Eastern Europe to sort of have a shield separating him and the West, or the West himself and democracy. So 1948, which is a few years after the war, Stalin has been able to establish some communist governments in Eastern Europe. This looks to the West like communism is really starting to spread. This real fear that communism is just going to go further and further and further unless it's stopped. Another element of this tension is the U.S. has atomic weapons now. And this has to factor into any negotiations or tensions because of the catastrophic power and destruction that can be caused by these weapons. Because the Soviet Union is afraid of this, they create their own. So now we have these two countries with atomic weapons with opposite perspectives on how the world should run. With these conflicting ideologies, I mean, they're just so opposite. In America, it's all about capitalism. It's about freedom of choice and the best product wins and the American dream. In the Soviet Union, it's socialism and communism, that we all have the same. No one has more than anyone else. In America, democracy means you get to choose. You get to be a part of the process in the leadership in the government. In Soviet Russia, government choose you. This totalitarian regime that we've seen under Stalin, and it's his way or the highway. In America, there is religious freedom, and it was the reason this country was created, to have the choice of religions. In Soviet Russia, it's mostly about atheism, not let anything become between you and the power of the government, or Stalin, or whoever the leader is. In general, America is about freedom. Soviet Russia is about equality. In America, it is good to be an individual, to do your own thing. But in Soviet Russia, it's about the community. It's about the sum total of everyone, the collective group. To be an individual is a bad thing. This phrase, the Iron Curtain, it's used all the time when we talk about the Cold War. It was created by Winston Churchill, my best friend. If you remember, in summer of 1945, with the new elections in Britain, Churchill was not re-elected to Parliament and was no longer Prime Minister. So he began a speaking tour, talking to, especially in America, and he was talking about some of the tensions in Europe. And he gives this phrase in a small town in Missouri, and he talks about how an Iron Curtain has descended from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic. That all of these territories that had been under Nazi rule, that the Allies had fought to free from Nazi rule, are now under communist rule. And so we've swapped one dictator for another, and this curtain, it's not an actual curtain, it's a metaphor, that his iron grip over these territories is in conflict with what the West stands for. It's because Stalin is very aggressive. And here we have some American propaganda. But this was really the fear that communism was going to spread, that it was going to take hold of all of these different places. And Stalin really didn't like the West either. He thought that capitalism was evil, it would lead to war, and he wants those atomic weapons at any cost. So there's this man named George Kennan, and he's a diplomat. He had worked in Moscow for quite a while, and he was advising the American president, President Truman. And in seeing what was going on in Soviet Russia, and seeing how the government speaks of the West and of these other territories, in 1946, 47, Kennan sends a telegram, a 16-page telegram to President Truman. Now, the thing is, why would you send a 16-page telegram? Why not send a letter? Well, it's a lot harder to intercept a telegram rather than a letter. And the phrase that comes out of this letter is containment, is what Kennan suggests as a seasoned diplomat seeing what Russia's goals are. He says, this threat must be contained. Otherwise, it will be like a series of dominoes, that if one country falls to communism, then the next one will fall, and the next one will fall. So we have to contain this threat now. It was seen as a real threat because of what Stalin was doing. He had created these governments. It wasn't just that communism happened spontaneously in Eastern Europe, but that Stalin had created them using puppet governments. So that the politicians are from the local country. Let's use Poland, for example. The man running for office is Polish, but he is getting his power, his money, and his instructions from the Soviet Union. So Stalin had been creating these systems throughout Eastern Europe, and just like in the creation of the Soviet Union and his establishment of power, anyone who opposes him will be eliminated. So this really is very, very aggressive. America uses slightly different tactics. America approaches post-war Europe, sort of with the unicorn, but not really. They want to encourage democracy. They want to encourage capitalism, because they truly believe that this is the most effective way to accomplish anything. One way we see this happen is with President Truman in Greece and Turkey. Britain had been involved in Greece and Turkey, and as we know, Britain sort of bows out of international politics at the end of World War II for a bit. And they ask America, will you step in Greece and Turkey and help support them? So this is called the Truman Doctrine. The United States goes in and gives aid, military and financial aid to Greece and Turkey, because they were afraid that those countries would be susceptible to communism. So this is how America is encouraging democracy, encouraging capitalism. It's actually successful. These countries are able to sort of rebuild a bit and do not become communist. So it seems like this system works. The Truman Doctrine works. It will be expanded into the Marshall Plan. It's also known as the European Recovery Plan. So it's named after the Secretary of State, Marshall. And this is taking this idea of the Truman Doctrine of giving financial aid to these countries in order to prevent them from becoming communist. It's because in war-torn Europe, if you think about how much Europe suffered in World War II, how much rebuilding they have to do, it would have been very, very enticing to have this system come in and say, so have you heard of communism? You know, the Soviets will come in and we will rebuild for you. We will set it all up and you will be good to go. This would mean they'd become communist. America says, we're going to help you. You're going to do it yourself, and we're going to help you do it. But if you do it yourself, it'll be stronger, it will last longer. And if you look at how much money is given to each of these countries, to France and Britain and Italy and Western Germany, it's because they were the most war-torn. They were the most susceptible to communism, because the communist parties had already been in these countries for a number of years. Now the threat is real. And so you'll see these signs all throughout Europe saying, this building rebuilt by the taxpayers of America to get Europe back on its feet again, to get it started back into, a normal way of life. And this is paid for by the American taxpayers. This is how real this threat of communism seems.